Humans in Space Station 14 are the game's most generic race. They are average in all stats, they don't have really any unique mechanics, and they're really just a baseline. Humans, the biggest distinguishing factors of humans compared to other races is that they take 1 times to all damage, they don't take any more or less damage from any type, they breathe oxygen, and their punches are just 5 units of blunt. Humans have a very specific sound when they talk. They have their own types of screams. Other noteworthy things of humans is they metabolize 2 reagents at a time, meaning that if you take a pill with 3 reagents, like Trico, Bicard, and Dorma, it will battle over which one will metabolize at the time, which means you can effectively sort of waste reagents because you can only metabolize 2 at a time, but you will keep metabolizing all of them, but you only get the benefit of 2. That is the case for most races, but I'll still cover them on a typical basis. And humans have red blood when they start bleeding on the floor. And there really isn't much more to cover about humans. They're generic. They have no specific... the Dwarf. The Dwarf is basically human but small. Their main differences is that they can drink alcohol to gain a very minor amount of brute healing. They are easier to shove over when they have a larger mass, but like dwarves don't have an easier time shoving other dwarves over. Also, shoving in general is just kind of weird. Shoving in general is just kind of weird, but it's off topic. But like obviously a dwarf shoving a dwarf isn't any better. But like a human can shove a dwarf over in 2 or 3 shoves. Dwarves talk with a pretty interesting Scottish accent, so certain words are replaced. So for example, if I type in "hi there, can I get a beer?" The I gets replaced with ah, because I mean I'm not good with accents, but that's one of their really only differences. They do the same damage with punches. They do 5 blunt with a punch. They bleed red. They have a slightly deeper pitch in their voices. And I'm not going to cover male female. I'm just covering the unique aspects. And yeah, dwarves are basically just shrunken humans. There's no real mechanical difference. They're just humans if you want to be a slightly smaller, have a funny accent, and get pushed over easier. That's the only thing you have to think about. Lizards are the first race other than... Lizards have a few notable differences compared to the other races, and most notably different than humans. First off, the fun part, their melee attacks do 5 piercing instead of 5 blunt, and piercing has a different damage resist in general, so it can be more useful in certain situations and not as useful in others, but it's almost always more preferable to do piercing as a melee damage unless you're fighting like security, but if you're punching security, probably in a bad situation. They have an accent that replaces a few words and all their S's roll, so if you just say like "hi guys," it'll be "hi guys" with multiple S's. And there's a few words that get replaced, but I'm not going to cover everything. They have a unique scream. That's like a screech, and their laughs are different. So those are more outward-facing differences. They are also the first species that I'm covering that have a different damage modifier. And what that means is they take different damages to different things. So reptilians, or lizards, have scale as a damage modifier, meaning they take more damage against blunt, but take less against slash. They also take less heat damage, so they actually take less damage. I mean, it's only 10%, but they do take less damage of the more important damage types. Slash is the most brutal right now in the game because of the fact that bleeding is rather dangerous. So, so being able to resist slash is rather strong, and 10% can make a difference because bleeding is directly related to how much damage you take, so taking less of it means you're going to bleed less. It could make a big difference. However, they are miserable in cold. So anytime like freeze on or something happens, they have to wear jackets. I mean, if you're a chef lizard, you pretty much have to wear a jacket or walking into your freezer can kill you. Um, they breathe oxygen, and another really interesting thing is that they have animal organs. So like they have an animal stomach, and what that means is that they process foods differently. So, for example, if they eat too much chocolate, they'll get poisoned. And if they have too much coffee, I mean, you have to have a lot of coffee, they'll get poisoned. And however, though, they have a massive boon. They can eat raw flesh. I don't think this is too much common knowledge, but due to the fact they have animal organs, when they eat raw meat, it gets converted into protein. So if you note my health right now, I'm at 24 blood loss and 48 brute. If you eat things like raw meat or you kill a mouse and butcher them, basically it converts the raw meat into protein. And protein is basically a chem that heals many types of damage, and it can even stop and heal bleeding. So remember, 48 brute, 24 blood loss. After eating just one raw meat, I am already have healed both the slash and pierce, and the blood loss is a mix of the protein and just natural blood recovery. It doesn't heal that much, but you can just, I mean, getting raw meat isn't that hard. Like, you could just kill mice with, like, a shard of glass or something, and then just butcher them. And doing that will give you raw meat. And even, like, if you're fighting rats or something, you could basically just kill and eat them to gain some healing. Like I said, not the biggest thing in the world, but it can have practical use. And in case I forgot to mention, the only other difference is lizards still only process 2 reagents at a time, like humans and dwarves, and their stomach capacity is lower, but it's not lower in any way that's really significant, so it's not something you really have to worry about too much. One more minor aspect of lizards is that they actually walk slightly faster than their races. I was under the misconception that they are actually slower than other races, but that's actually not true. They actually walk faster than other races, and they have the same run speed as the other races, other than the arachnid. The arachnid's different. Slimes are next on the list. Slimes are not that much more mechanically different than humans. The most notable things is that they're the first race that I've covered that can metabolize more than 2 reagents at a time. They can metabolize 6, so that could be good if you're eating like mixes of pills or just eating a lot of things at once. So they can heal better because of that. They do 5 blunt punch, nothing different there. The most notable things are they breathe nitrogen, and they take a lot more barotrauma damage, which I will show that off at the very end just to keep it more simplified. And they take way less blunt damage, so they're really good at fighting against baseball bats and stuff like that. However, they take significantly more pierce and slash, which is pretty terrible because those are the combat damages. Your slimes bleed like crazy, and due to bleeding actually being an effect now, slimes are rather rare because you're just so disadvantaged in any combat fight because of the slash and pierce modifier. Knives only do 10 damage, so getting hit once and taking 12 damage is just really not in your best interest. It can often reduce the amount of hits that it needs to kill somebody by 2 or 1 or 2, and especially when wide swings start getting hit, you start getting hit by large multipliers. Most of the time, if you're going to get in a fight in this game, that's actually going to be a lethal one. You're going to be getting stabbed, slashed, or shot. So slimes are just more doomed to die in almost any combat scenario. Slimes do, however, have green blood. And when they talk, they make a pretty interesting gloop sound. They don't have any unique scream sound, and they don't have any unique laugh sound. Just sounds like humans. That's pretty much the only real differences between them. They're not that unique of a race. Breathing nitrogen is their biggest gameplay change-up. But other than that, they're basically just weak combat slime creatures, if we're talking mechanical differences. They also I can also mention they are immune to 2 diseases. They can't get cancer, which doesn't occur naturally in the game, so that one's kind of mute, or that one's kind of useless. But they are immune to Bleeder's Bite, which is also not very common at all. But Bleeder's Bite is one of the most dangerous diseases in the game, so being immune to that is one tiny boon. They're also not very, they're resistant to getting poisoned, and they're very resistant to cellular damage. So don't try to poison a slime, it's not as effective. But there is also one more interesting use case where they can basically take high dosages of spacicillin without worrying too much about it, because they have an 80% reduction to cellular. So they can kind of eat spacicillin without much risk. So they can get cured of diseases easier due to that, but most diseases you just sleep off. So that benefit kind of ends almost immediately, unfortunately. One very minor thing to slimes is that they breathe in nitrogen, like I said, but they exhale nitrous oxide, which can put people to sleep. But it's in a pretty minor level, so you basically have to put slimes in a room to harvest it if you want to actually make anything out of it. But just one's cool little detail. Now we move on to Diona. Diona are of the two races, of the two most unique races in the game. However, they don't see much play because they are overall very hard to play. They are much slower than all the other races by a pretty large margin, and they walk extremely slow. They can't wear shoes, so if you ever walk into a single room that has a glass shard, you're going to step on it, and you're going to be knocked down because of it. That also means certain items like D4 and stuff are actually a major problem to them. But due to the fact they can't wear shoes means you can't wear no slips, you can't wear mag boots. A pretty big debuff. They can metabolize 6 reagents at a time. Their punches do 5 blunt. The big benefit of Diona are they are massive, so to speak. So like this is probably one of their hidden uses, is that they're really good at shoving over other races, especially dwarves. They will practically always shove them over in 2 to 3 shoves, and getting shoved over is a pretty long knockdown. But you're so slow that trying to catch up to people is basically impossible, and that's without even wearing armor. So if you wear armor, you're going to be slow as hell. They don't have any unique sounds when they talk, but they do have unique screams. And they have a unique laugh, which I really enjoy the scream and laugh. More on the negatives, though. They dehydrate really quickly, and when you're actually dehydrated, you will lose even more movement speed, to the point that it becomes painful to really walk around. You're moving at less than half speed with no armor on. Due to the fact they're so slow, makes them really undesirable in combat, and they only take less damage against blunt and slash, not pierce. So taking less against slash is good, but they take 50% more heat damage. So if you get shot by a few lasers, you're done. And like 50% is no joke on hit scan weapons. One of the biggest saving grace as well for this race is the fact that they can kind of drink robust harvest. See, I have 7 blunt, 8/5 pierce. So as you can see, even just drinking that little bit of robust harvest, it healed the brute amazingly, but it actually doesn't heal heat damage. So it isn't quite like Omnizine, but robust harvest is pretty easily acquired, and it does. I mean, it helps out being able to have a medicine that's not just in chem. Like botanist could probably give you a bottle if you just ask for it. If you're a botanist, that is one major benefit to you. They breathe oxygen, and they have blood that looks pretty much identical to water. And one benefit, though, of them being this slow, by default, at normal move speed, they can't slip. They're below the threshold required to slip on things like banana peel and soap. So that is one combat advantage of them, and you basically have to abuse the fact that you can't slip on normal slippery surfaces. You'll still slip on Space Lube. But if I show you real quick, a normal move speed race, they will slip even on their blood. So that does give you one edge in combat. Another really minor element of Diona is that they can actually breathe in carbon dioxide. Uh, Carbon dioxide becoming an actual problem on the station is something I have never seen. Actually, no, I lied. I have seen it one time ever become a problem where the air was too dangerous because of carbon dioxide, and that's literally because somebody sabotaged Atmos with carbon dioxide. So Diona, in that one situation I've ever seen, would be fine. They could breathe it like oxygen. Arachnids are the newest species to join the space station. They immediately have some distinguishing features. They have two new slots called web slots, which are basically just pockets, but they actually lose the ability to have an exosuit storage. So if I put on this EVA suit, you can't actually equip things like oxygen tanks, like the big oxygen tanks on your back. There's just nowhere to put it. It can't go in the web slots. So you either hold them or you just don't use the big suit slot items. One of the biggest downsides of the arachnids that I forgot to almost mention was that they can't actually wear glasses either. So you have to wear like a welding mask if you want to have protection against like flashes, or if you're an engineer just even doing your job. Because if you're security, you obviously don't want to be able to be blinded by your own flashes, and if you're engineering, you don't want to be blinded by your welder. The strip menu of the arachnids is a little different because they have the extra pocket slots, but it's nothing you can't figure out. Another benefit of arachnids is their move speed is actually faster than every other race by default. And ignore me slipping. They move marginally faster. It's not too much faster. And they walk faster as well. However, to compensate for this, they slow down earlier than the other species. So the other species slow down at basically higher damage modifiers, but as soon as you even get half health, you will slow down a good bit, and then your speed advantage is gone. Arachnids also take slightly more blunt, slightly more pierce, but they take less slash. That makes them somewhat more combat viable against slash, because slash is the most dangerous damage type, but they also take 25% more heat, and they don't do well in the cold. So they're not the most combat ready species, but their speed and their early health values can make a difference, especially for melee. You also be able to dodge bullets slightly easier because of that. They also, what is interesting about them, they take less Barotrauma damage, unlike slimes, which take more, and every other species takes the same damage. They breathe oxygen, but what's cool about the oxygen is they take way more asphyxiation damage and recover their asphyxiation slower. So not having oxygen on is actually worse than being in space without a suit. So like you need to make sure you keep an oxygen tank on you like pretty much at all times. It's not even just like it's a requirement for them that you just do not want to deal with it choking. They don't have a unique accent, but they do sound different, and it's kind of scary. It almost sounds like Papers, Please to me, but that's unrelated. There's scream and laugh. They also have a unique melee, like the lizard does. They do 3 units of slash and 1 unit of poison. And remember, the arachnids are resistant to poisonous slash. That's why the numbers aren't adding up. And arachnids have dark blue blood, and it is not slippery. So that is the major differences between them. And one more thing to add is that they actually have animal organs. So like lizards, they can metabolize meat into protein to heal off of it. And they actually metabolize slower, which can be a benefit or a negative. Like if you need emergency healing, it's going to take longer to heal you. So bleeding could be more of a problem because of that. But you can also use things like gauze. Now I'll move on to the Barotrauma test, which is one of the more distinguishing factors between the races or the species. And this one is just all the species with the dwarf is in there because it's the same as the human in this regard. All the species without an oxygen mask, just to show you the difference in the time to die, basically. And as you can see, the slime is gasping at a slower rate because slimes just simply breathe slower, but they're the first to take a new damage state because they take increased barotrauma damage. And arachnids dies from asphyxiation much quicker, but they don't take that much barotrauma damage, so the real difference between them will show after in the next test where they all have their respective breathing apparatuses. So the arachnid is the first to fall, which I expected, because they take a ton of asphyxiation damage. And they have all hit critical. So I have given all of the species again their respective breathing apparatuses. They are all breathing, and now we will see how that affects their longevity to spacings. So now that all four have fallen, except the arachnid, that is what we expected, because the arachnid is no longer having the breathing issue, and they take less barotrauma damage. And they have finally fallen. In conclusion, species are not all that different from each other, but they do have their shining moments in specific scenarios where they are just majorly different. I hope this video explains most of the changes. I know I forgot things. There's always some things to forget, but I know for sure I included the big things, and I hope you learned something.